Greetings, everybody. Patriots Lament Radio, April 13th, 2020, or as we like to say, the 13th day of April Fools. Today we have Becky Akers on, and we're going to get to her in just a minute here. First, we're going to go through our list of numbers as per usual. So our economic numbers for the day. We've been tracking how the Dow and oil and gold, how all this stuff's been moving around during this crisis. Wall Street numbers, Dow closed at 23,400, down 1.4%. S&P closed at 2760, down 1.1%. NASDAQ closed at around 8,200, up 0.5%. So Wall Street market's basically flat. Oil, 22.57, so down 1%. Still, below $25 a barrel, which is astounding. Gold moved a bunch today. Gold was up 2% to 1716. So it's starting to, it's decoupling a little bit from the Wall Street markets, as we've seen. Silver was flat, closed at 1539. Gold silver ratio is at 111.5, so still high by historic standards. Dollar index 99.5, so still real high. People still moving into the dollar as a safe haven. Crypto markets were up today. Crypto markets were sideways today. They were down about 3%. Bitcoin's down 4%, 68.05, and Ether was down about 5%, 155.8, but up from last week significantly. So those are our economic numbers.
And U.S. cases are at 583,000 and 23,500 deaths. Global cases, 1,917,000 with 119,000 deaths reported.
So there are our number wrap-ups for Monday. Most of which are, unverifiable. There you go, including the Wall Street numbers.
Even if we could verify them, it's still like, what are we doing?
Yeah, which is something
true.
Something Becky's been writing about on LouRockwell.com. Becky, would you like to give us your synopsis of this whole situation, this coronavirus situation, and your latest thoughts on it?
Yes, well, everybody stand back because I'm about to unleash. I am astounded. I am shocked at how the entire world has taken leave of its senses. The numbers that Corey just ran through are absolutely ludicrous. Let's remember that there are, 6 to 7 billion people on this planet, and we have 1.9 million cases of infection, and those are probably highly inflated. They're unreliable numbers. 1.9 million out of 6 to 7 billion is something like less than 0.1%. And this is people infected. We're not talking fatalities. We're talking they've got a couple of cold germs flying around their bodies. Okay. And for that, governments around the world have shut their citizens down. Now, that's what we expect from politicians. I don't think they're going to do anything other than try to sabotage our lives, try to rule us, try to reign over us, order us around, act like they know everything and we know nothing. That is the definition of the sociopathic politician that stalks the world. Okay, but why are people listening to these fools? Why are people saying, you want me to stay home? Oh, goodness. I don't dare go out. I might get sick. I might get a cold. Sure, I'll stay home. I'll give up all my work. I won't get a paycheck. That's fine. I'll stay home. That's what I don't get. So anybody who can enlighten me on that, please do.
What do you think about, one of the reasons that people might be staying home is they're getting paid to do so now.
Yes. There are a couple of people here and there. I understand that. I'm related to one of them, in fact, who enjoys being home, thinks it's great, getting a paycheck, doesn't have to go out, doesn't have to deal with the terrible folks out there, doesn't have to deal with traffic, all that kind of stuff. But there are an awful lot of people who are desperate, who are one paycheck away from losing their house. Although, of course, mortgages and failure to pay them have all been put on hold by our rulers. You'll notice that they haven't forgiven taxes.
Yeah.
They are, of course, telling banks to forgive mortgages, but somehow they still demand to get their taxes. And by the way, does anyone else see something really eerie in the IRS is saying, we'll take late payments? You don't have to file now until June or July, whatever it is. Isn't that kind of like a serial killer stalking into your living room and saying, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'd like to kill everybody here. Is that okay with you? I mean, it's just eerie, you know? This is not how thieves treat their marks. They don't say, I'm going to give you a few more months here, okay? I mean, this has never happened before in American history. And how about the elections being postponed? You know, primary elections here and there. Also, very, very eerie, because let's remember, voting is a sacramental right in the progressive religion that every American now ascribes to, except a few of us wackos. And so they've put this on hold. Okay, again, very, very eerie. And just these two, I mean, I could go on and keep listing examples of governments that are acting very eerily. But let's just concentrate on these two. This is not what we should expect. And it says to me that there is something going on a whole lot deeper than cold or flu germs floating around.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, especially with the taxes, you know, it was brought up a little bit about stopping withholding taxes for a while, which is immediate benefit to people. But you can't let them keep their own money. We'll send them money that we're going to print, but we're not going to allow them to keep it. And I can understand if I was them, I would never want to be them. But if I was, I can understand. I wouldn't want employees to get their full paycheck and then have it taken again in a few months.
Right.
Because they would be really mad. Not to mention they'd all be wondering, wow, when did I get a raise? Because most people don't have a clue what withholding taxes are.
Just like you can't ever allow the idea that, you know, they have very much managed to divorce the services quote from payment of them. For instance, we all pay for public schools, whether we have kids in them or not. They'll never allow that divorcing of services from results or from use to ever gain traction, because then the entire house of cards falls. And exactly what you just said, Joshua, they cannot allow us to keep our own money because we would get used to it. And we might actually think that we're entitled to what we earned. And that maybe these useless, worthless sponges called politicians and bureaucrats should go out and get a real job instead of sponging off of us.
What do you think of, you talked about the stuff that's not being forgiven, and Josh mentioned it as well, like withholding taxes not being removed. There's talk of student loan. I guess student loans have been deferred for 6 months now, and there's talk about student loan forgiveness. Why would those be forgiven, but not something like part of your income tax? What do you think about that?
Because that money's already been spent, and after all, it was our money. They don't care about our money once it's spent. They care about getting their filthy paws on our money that we have just earned and haven't yet had a chance to spend ourselves. So, of course, it never surprises me if they're going to forgive student loans because, you know, I mean, that's like my saying to you, David, hey, I'm going to forgive your debtor over there. I was like, where do I get the authority to say the guy who owes you money doesn't have to pay it back? And yet that's what politicians routinely do to us. So, you know, with all of this stuff going on, with this clamp down now by the state on Christians and various governors in various states telling Christians whether they can meet, and in fact, mostly they can't, telling them how they can meet. Now, we'll let you assemble in a parking lot, but the cars have to be 6 feet away from each other. And if you're going to do communion, it's got to be a little pre-wrapped wafer. I mean, what is this lunacy? Okay. with all this stuff going on, I would think that the average sheeple out there, not just those of us on the, anarcho-capitalist sides, but everybody out there should be able to see government is not acting the way it normally does. And this should really frighten them. It's like when a volcano starts heaving a little bit. You don't sit there and say, it's unusual behavior. You get the heck out of the way. So, again, with the government doing all this to us and with this total evisceration of the Bill of Rights, everybody should be worried about this. And I don't see that. I've spent the last month trying to stir up Christians in churches, in the church I attend, and I am being roundly vilified for this. The pastor is no longer even responding to my emails. He's been very snippy and nasty. And what am I doing? I am asking the man to open the church doors and hold services as we are supposed to do. And he, the minister of the gospel, is telling me to get lost. So, I'm just astounded that Christians en masse are not rising up, are not taking to the streets against these petty tyrants and bullies in government and telling them, look, the First Amendment rules. Doesn't matter if you don't want it out there. It's out there, and we are abiding by it. If I were an atheist, I would be protesting. I would be going to every church I could all Sunday. I would find every single one that's still open and be there to support these people, because after all, if government is now strong enough to subjugate one of the biggest groups in the country, and I'm using Christian here in the sense of not Buddhist, not Hindu, not Jewish, but not according to the Bible, but that generic term of Christian. If government is strong enough to tell one of the largest groups in the country, you can't meet, then every other group ought to be terrified.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What do you think about the, it's not even as much as, it seems like churches not wanting to go against the authority.
Yes.
Those good Roman 13s Christians. But
yeah.
It seems like a lot of them are doing it out of fear too.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, the gospel, the gospels, God tells us, do not live in fear. And what are we doing?
Exactly. What are we doing?
In complete fear.
I'm astounded at how people, Christian brothers and sisters, whom I had thought were so strong in the Lord, who were rooted in the Bible, they are just panic struck. And I think a lot of it is this Romans 13, but once you get beyond that, there is this fear. I just had an exchange, and let me explain. I actually attend two churches. We have an apartment in New York City. I attend church there. And then about 20 years ago, I inherited a house in the Midwest. And so we spend a lot of time at it. And when we're there, we attend a church near our house. So I have experiences now in two churches, and both of them are closed. I've had email exchanges pleading with the powers that be in both churches to open. I'm hearing this. The one church out here, the guy's furious at me, will no longer even email with me except to just give me commands and, try to order me around. The church in New York is actually listening, but the guy made exactly that point. We don't want to get sick. We don't want to, I said, could we please open? Well, we don't want to get sick. And again, this is a guy that I have a lot of respect for. Good, dear brother in the Lord, prayed for me. I pray for him. And I'm just sitting there thinking, where is the providence of God? Do you no longer believe that the Lord will care for you and take care of you? And after all, it's in his hands if we get bubonic plague, let alone a cold or flu. I mean, come on. And it's just astounding to me how many Christians are running scared and how many of them are bowing down at this altar that the state has erected. The state has said public health is our new idol. We will suspend church services to keep the public healthy. And American Christians are going right along with that and genuflecting at Baal's altar. And I don't get it. It's like, is nobody afraid of the judgment of God here?
Do you think this might? Oh, go ahead, Dave.
What do you think about this as an opportunity for home churches? Like the idea, idea of a church building itself is like the idea of Sunday school. A lot of people are like, well, you can't have a church without Sunday school. Well, like, what about like the first few, 100 years, maybe 1700 years of church or something? Or like the Anabaptists, the Amish and Mennonites and stuff like that. The old order don't have a church building. They meet at each other's homes. It seems like this could be a great opportunity for this weird 501c3 church in America in particular to go, maybe the building isn't serving us. Maybe we're serving the building.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of congregations like that. I attended a church in New York City for a while that the building was just idolized. And I was so intrigued that we spent so much time trying to figure out how to keep the building afloat because, in New York, you've got all kinds of regulations on reconstruction and renovation and just basic maintenance. The facade has to be maintained according to city regulations. I mean, it's a tremendously expensive undertaking to have any kind of building in New York City. So I'm very, very well aware that there are a number of, quote, Christians out there who love the building more than they love the Lord. And, pox upon them. They're just slow down the spread of the gospel. As far as churches, home churches, this, just like homeschooling, I think there's a lot of opportunity in all this. Hopefully more and more people will see that homeschooling is the way to go. Kids are wanting to stay home. I've read that different places. Kids are really excited. They don't have to go to school. They can learn from their parents. I'm hoping parents pick up on that. Churches meeting in the home, that's great. And it would probably get us away from a lot of this 501c nonsense where pastors are more concerned about their taxation status than they are about the gospel. I wonder if a lot of this reluctance to go against the government and open when governors are saying you have to stay home, I've been wondering if a lot of that is due to the tax exempt status. If it is, shame on you. We should be following the Lord no matter what it costs. I keep thinking about our brothers and sisters overseas who are being persecuted. The church in China, where the Chinese government, communists say to them, you go to church, buddy, we're arresting you, we're throwing you in jail, and we're going to torture you. And those Christians still meet. Those Christians don't allow the government to push them around. They meet, they praise the Lord in corporate worship. We have pastors selling out their congregations because a governor suggests everybody stay home. Now, we should all be aware they don't have the legal authority to do this, okay? They're getting away with it because people aren't standing up. Americans aren't standing up and saying boo to a goose. These guys can't keep us at home. We can go out and we can do whatever we want to do, and they certainly cannot deny our First Amendment rights to assemble and to meet and to worship as we please. They have absolutely no authority to do this. Stand up, defy them. I can't imagine what the church in heaven thinks of us. The early Christians who are now in heaven with the Lord face to face, who died in Roman arenas, devoured by wild beasts, and what they must be thinking as they watch this, assuming they can see us, of course, the Bible isn't clear on that, but what do you think the martyrs through the ages are thinking of the American church right now? We have the freedom to meet. We have the Constitution guaranteeing we can gather, and yet we have wusses in the pulpits saying, oh, gosh, my tax status, I might lose it. No, we're not going to meet. The governor said it would really upset him if we did. And we don't want to do that because we're good Romans 13 Christians.
What do you think about in some areas where they're actually arresting or putting out
Yeah.
arrest warrants for pastors and
Yeah. Yeah. Why aren't churches standing with them? Why aren't we standing with them? I've asked my pastor in the Midwest that question. I've never gotten a response. Why aren't we standing with them? Every single church out there, as soon as the first war against an individual pastor, the government launched it, every single church should have opened its doors as wide as it could and said, get in here, pack in here, the heck with social distancing, we are standing. And every atheist in the country should have been inside those churches too, saying, you know what, that's enough to get me here. I will stand with these people that the government is persecuting, because if it can tell them what to do, it can throw me in jail and throw away the key too.
Yep.
So we were talking about fear, and it seems like that can be broken down into fear of authority and fear of virus. And at some level, I think it comes down to the fear of the virus. People are legitimately afraid, or they're actually afraid of what they're being told. So is that just something where God is supposed to protect people who go to church, or is there anything that I guess in general people should be responsible for their health?
Well, before I would let somebody scare me silly, I'd want some proof. I am astounded at how many people swallow every single thing the media tells them. There's no critical thinking. Just the numbers that you read, Corey. Mm-hmm. Now, those are not hard to find. In fact, our house at the Midwest, the local newspaper publishes a little box every single day with the worldwide cases of coronavirus. And then there are 14 pages after the little box, all filled with scaremongering. And I'm just astounded. It's like, does anybody have any rationality left that they can look at that little box and they can say, wait a minute, here are all these articles about the old person in Illinois who had heart disease and cancer and was 103 years old and whoops, got coronavirus, and that's it, they died. But somehow my rational thought just leaves me, and it's a terrible thing, that person died. I'm sorry for them, and I don't mean to make light of any death, but come on. Where is your rational, critical thinking that you can say 1.9 million deaths out of 6 to 7 billion? Okay, less than 1/10 of 1%. You know what? I'm not going to get real afraid about this. There just is no reason to panic. Again, it's not like the numbers are hidden. I'm just mystified that people seem to have taken such leave of their senses, and they are allowing this hysteria to overcome them. My theory is that modern American life is so safe and so cushy that most people long for excitement. And this is the most excitement they've had since I don't know what. I feel really sorry for people that impoverished in their spirit. I mean, liberty is so fascinating, so exciting. I never get tired of being free. I am so thrilled to be able to chart my own course and set my own, my own systems and live life according to the Word of God. That's enough for me. I don't need all this fake terror. And people out there that are really getting off on this, and they've got the mask and they've got the gloves, and they go to the supermarket and wow, I was really brave. I walked into the supermarket and bought a quart of milk, and now I might die from coronavirus. It's just insanity.
One thing we noted, one of the reasons we started tracking the official numbers on the cases,
right,
was so we've been doing that for maybe a month now. Even on the CDC's website, the 2011-2012 flu season, I think, is noted on there. There were 56,000 people estimated who died of the flu in 2011 to 2012, which is not ancient history, right?
No.
And so we've been waiting. We've been following the official numbers to see when this story lives up to the hype, basically. and it has yet to.
Right.
And that's like one of the numbers we were curious about was, okay, traffic accidents, right? And everybody
Right.
knows that millions of people die in traffic accidents every year, but how many die per day? And so that was actually a number we looked at, and the officially reported coronavirus deaths per day exceeded traffic accidents, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, something like that.
23rd.
23rd of March. Okay. So we're looking at that and we're like, okay, maybe now it's like a news item. And now it's sort of flattening out, and the U.S. deaths to date are less than half of the 2011-2012 flu season, and it's the numbers are starting to roll off. One of the we'll see what happens, but one of the conundrums about the whole thing is if it ends up being a non-event, it's like the perfect 9/11 type event for the state. With 9/11, they actually had to have buildings that fell down, which was hard to do. And they actually had to get like some videos of guys in the Middle East who look scary. With this, it's interesting because if the numbers end up not being significant, and there's people dying for sure, but if it ends up being not worse than the average flu season, then the government gets to say, look at what we prevented.
Yes, they win either way.
They win either way. And it's a conundrum for the talking points, like the point Corey brings up. A lot of people are just concerned about their own health. And you brought up, how could anybody go along with this? Well, I think that's a valid question. But there's another question, which is that a lot of people are going along with it. So how do we speak to them without making them feel belittled or ignored or stupid?
Well, I don't know that that's possible, and because I actually think they should be feeling stupid right about now. These people are bringing down our country. They have kept me out of church for the past month. I'm all for belittling them as much as we can and trying to shame them into some sort of, I don't even want to say courage, but just try to be a normal human being, for pity's sake. We're not talking about bubonic plague here. We're talking about the flu. You raised a couple of interesting points too on the automobile accidents. If our purpose in shutting down the churches, as pastors keep trying to tell me, is to protect the parishioners and protect the community, well, you know what? There are a lot of people killed in car accidents on their way to church. Are we going to continue to meet virtually after this nonsense goes away? If it ever does, I don't know that it will, because government is really benefiting from all this. This could be hanging around for quite a while since there's been so little pushback. Everybody should be aware of that. When you don't stand up to politicians, like any bully, you don't stand up to them, they continue abusing you. So we get seasonal flu every single year, let alone all the pathogens that the CDC and other governments around the world unleash on us, okay? This may be the new normal, since government has succeeded so wildly at locking everybody down. So if you have no other reason to go out there except you don't want to stay in your house the rest of your life, you better get out there. You better start defying these tyrants. You had better, as a Christian especially, and I want to speak to the pastors who are closing churches, you better realize you have a limited window of opportunity to act, okay? Because in the camps where they're going to put all the dissidents, including you, pastor, you're going to be with us even if you genuflected to the altar of Baal and public health. And you're going to be with us even if you bent over backward to kowtow to the governor. And even if you tried hard to placate him and tried hard to shut your church because he wanted you to, you're still going to be with us. Because you know what? To the state, one Christian is the same as the next. And all of us are going to be in the camps. And the time to stop that from happening is over the next couple of weeks. Okay, they are disarming people in Virginia. That's not an accident. That coincides with this coronavirus hysteria. It's been ginned up for just that reason. And every governor out there is going to take advantage of the fact that everyone is hysterical, everybody is not paying attention, everybody is at home per his orders, nobody can come out and protest. They're going to continue stripping our rights from us. The time to react against all this is now.
What do you think about the virtual meetings?
Oh, they are from the pit of hell. Okay. What this has done is this has allowed the state to totally defang the church. You know what? If I want a sermon online, there are millions of them. I can go to John MacArthur's website and get archives from years ago. Okay. I do not need my local pastor to stand there like a monkey and perform for the camera and post it. I'm not interested. I don't even watch it. Okay. Our Father commanded us, do not forsake the assembling of yourselves together, as the manner of some is. Okay? What an absolute crime that 99% of the pastors in this country have capitulated and are breaking that commandment to obey a mere man called a governor. Okay? What a crime. And that is an eternal sin, an eternal shame. They are going to answer for it one day. We don't need virtual meetings. We need to fellowship with one another in person. And by the way, there's an epidemiologist who says that is the way to stop coronavirus. All this isolation at home and this social distancing and everything prolongs it, doesn't curtail it at all. Okay? Doesn't that make sense now that all the politicians and bureaucrats are telling us all isolate and stay away from each other? Because the longer this goes on, the more power they get. But at any rate, we don't need virtual meetings. We need to assemble with one another. There is an excitement and a joy in worship that arises only when we are all face to face and worshiping corporately our wonderful Savior.
We actually posted I think I know which epidemiologist you're talking about. Mike sent us a link to a compilation of his videos talking about that, how that's where immunity comes from. Right. And we discussed there are some Christian traditions where the communion cup is shared. Right. And the purpose of that is actually to bind the community in terms of pathogens and stuff like that. Yes. And a lot of these traditions predate germ theory. Like they were developed because presumably they worked across time. Yes. So it's interesting seeing some of those conflicts. I find it interesting. I'm a big fan of home church myself. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of corporate church. So I don't think anybody should be banned from gathering. And I think that if people want to gather, they should. I found it astounding how many people are willing to stamp their feet about big churches not gathering, but they're not gathering at home. Right. With their closest members of they're not gathering with the believers they identify the closest with anyway. And there's actually no prohibition on that. There isn't even a law against that if you wanted to follow the law. So there's like a really...
Yeah, they can't tell you can't have people come over to your house. Right. So do it.
Right. That's like the lowest bar act of resistance.
Yeah. And I was amazed. Passover this last week. That is a huge, and after my years in New York, I'm well aware of it. Huge family holiday. And yet Jews are capitulating too. They're all doing the Zoom Seder and stuff. It's like, what is wrong with you? Get out there. This is your family. Meet with them. My goodness. The other thing that really amuses me about all this is for decades, pastors dismissed this idea and Christians dismissed this idea that you could just go out in the field and worship the Lord. I mean, how many times have we heard it? I do my best worshiping on the golf course. Oh, really? I do my best worshiping in my garden. I don't need to go to church. And now pastors are the ones saying it. Yeah, you don't need to come to church. Just sit on your couch and live stream. So I have updated the psalm. Remember where David says, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. I've updated that to say, I was glad when they said unto me, let's sit on the couch and live stream.
We've talked the other day about how even in a corporate church or a larger church body, there's usually very few people that you associate with when you go there. Like, you make close friends with maybe a half a dozen, some people a dozen, but rarely do you go through, if you have 200 members in your church, you don't know all 200 members. You don't know all 1,000 or all 100
Right.
even. So these few friends that you have closer, intimate relationships with, those are the ones you should be having at home and have your church.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I keep thinking, why aren't we all getting together in our homes on Sunday morning? And I understand that there are logistical problems. For instance, in New York City, that is tough to have a number of people in a, 400 square foot apartment. But in the rest of the country, what can they do? But again, it goes back to, while that will enable us to worship, it is not addressing the fundamental problem of government ordering the church to close and the church capitulating. And that is a real concern. There are a number of ways we can get around this, but basically, just as you've suggested, Joshua, we can all meet in our houses, but at some point we need to take a stand. This has been an age-old conflict and an age-old contest. Is the state paramount to the church, or is the church paramount to the state? And it was fought in the Middle Ages, and it was fought during the 18th century, and over, one or the other has gained prominence. Those of us who are Christians and anyone who loves freedom should clearly come down on the side of the church. Okay, the church is paramount. The church is eternal. The church is to whom we owe our first allegiance. Even if you are an atheist, you should be in favor of those principles, because the church, just like the family, is a bulwark against the state. Okay, the state will take everything over it can get its grubby little hands on. The state's primary purpose is to be totalitarian. The state wants everything in it, nothing outside of it, just as Mussolini said. And although he was one of the first fascists, that is the characteristic of all governments throughout world history and around the world. Okay, they want everything they can get under their control. The church needs to stand against that. Christians need to stand up against that. If we don't, we are going to lose the few freedoms we have left.
I have a question for you on that. This is something we talked about on Saturday. Our Saturday show the theme was that there is no normal for things to go back to. People are like, oh, it'll go back to normal. And the theme actually was that the status quo, let's say in December of 2019, was it was the end of the legacy of an era that went away long ago, and that we aren't actually seeing a difference in people now in April from 2019 December. We're actually just seeing that when you peel back this last vestige of a bygone era, you're seeing what's left, which is nothing.
Subservience, yes.
Yep. So that was something that was the theme of our show on Saturday. And there are a few ways to look at that. There's there's a way to move through troubled times. I think Christ sets a really good example of this. Christ didn't wave signs. Okay.
No.
Christ didn't write letters to the governor.
No. No.
Christ didn't go and oil up his AR.
Right.
Okay. Christ didn't store food.
Right.
Okay. Christ didn't protest police oppression.
Right.
Right. He just went to people and taught them the gospel. And that was a time of very great oppression. And then the church under Nero, right, at the time of Paul, very similar thing. Like the church was busy taking care of orphans and widows and people who were falling off the edge of society. And part of the reason they were persecuted was because Rome claimed that there were no problems in Rome. And the way that they would deal with the problem people is they would kill them. So the church was taking care of them as human beings. So I think that as a human being, we have limited resources available to us. And to the extent that we focus those on resistance, we have to be very careful. This is my opinion. We have to be very careful that resistance is in line with furthering the gospel and not in line with stoking our ego or restoring some vision of political America. Because I think those are radically secondary goals to promoting the gospel.
Yes, and the Bible is very clear on that. I think that's one reason why, although there are enormous numbers of passages in the Bible that outright condemn political government, there's not an overriding command to be sure you establish utopia on earth. And by the way, it should be an anarchic utopia. Bible just isn't concerned with that. And so we shouldn't make that our primary motive either. That said, I think there are two different goals to consider as we look at the churches being forcibly closed. We have the goal to worship the Lord. We are commanded to meet weekly and do that. Whether we do it in a house church or whether we do it some other way, that we are commanded to meet weekly, to encourage one another, and to worship the Lord. The second goal we should have, and it's a lesser goal, but it's still important, is the goal of defending our freedom, okay? As these tyrants are trying to bully us, and right now we can still fight back. We can defy them. We can go out and walk the streets. We can go out and drive. We can go house to house and call on people, that sort of thing, as long as we can continue to defy them. But when they start stripping our weapons from us, as Virginia is doing to its people, that, in my opinion, is when we all need to start really answering force with force. Okay, so we've got a dual responsibility: worship the Lord, but also defend our freedom. And it's very interesting, David. I was thinking about this the other day. American Christians, consider subservience to political government and worship of the military to be fundamental to their Christianity. Okay, I'm sure you've all been in churches where the Pledge of Allegiance is said and where we're praying for our boys in the service and our troops and all that kind of stuff. It's very much a part of American Christianity. But the founding generation, the founding fathers, very much a part of their Christianity was political liberty. And they considered disobedience to tyrants obedience to God.
So they're an interesting example, but Christ is a far more interesting example to me than the founding fathers. And many of the founding fathers were deists, like Thomas Jefferson in particular. He was a student of the Enlightenment. And
that was not until later in life. That he went more and more deist the older he got. Sure. And I hear that charge leveled at various ones. The only two that were really, really deistic were Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. Really, deism did not make inroads in this country until well into the 19th century. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Well,
yes, they were all students of the Enlightenment, however. And the Enlightenment was an initial schism. It was kind of where belief and knowledge were divorced for the first time in a really big way. Belief and knowledge. It used to be that belief was the fundamental step you took towards knowledge, because you had to believe that something was true in order to even begin pursuing it. Right. And so there are many nuances to the founding of America, and they are complicated. And so using founding documents as a source text for how to live a Christian life, I think needs to be pursued with a lot of caution.
Yes, a lot of caution.
I would ask you this question. When you say that we must defend our freedom, but you say that we don't need to, people who are worried about defending their well-being against a virus lack faith in God. But people who will take up arms to defend their freedom, how do you resolve those two? Those seem to be in conflict to me.
Why? I'm not following you because
because your well-being from a virus is a physical form of freedom, and your freedom from the state is also a physical freedom. Paul didn't value his physical freedom very highly. From prison, he when given the opportunity to walk out of the prison, he stayed because he said he couldn't be any more free than he already was. And so I agree with you. I think freedom is a massive privilege. But to say that people who are concerned about a virus are crazy, but people who are concerned about their guns being taken have a legitimate concern, both of those seem to share a common denominator of lack of faith in God's purpose for us and in our role in enforcing God's kingdom on earth through violence.
Okay. A virus, if what you fear is the polio virus, your fear is well placed. Polio is very, very serious. It could cripple you for life. And I guess what I'm doing is I'm kind of conflating the word fear with caution. Okay. I understand somebody saying, you know what? I'm not going to go swimming in that water because I've heard people that go in that water get polio. I don't consider you to have a lack of faith in God for taking that kind of precaution. After all, we don't want to substitute faith for recklessness or vice versa. Okay? I can't go to the top of the Empire State Building and say, you know what? I don't care if I get near the edge because the Lord will protect me. That's not what we're talking about when we say we don't have fear. What we mean when we say this is if I am a nurse and I am caring for polio patients and I am trying to share the gospel with them, or I'm a nurse currently and I am caring for people with coronavirus, the elderly who are very stricken with it and who are having trouble breathing, I have faith that the Lord will protect me, or he may allow me to contract coronavirus too. But either way, his will for me is what I want, and I will trust in him. When it comes to weapons and freedom, political freedom, knowing that political freedom is a shaky and very delicate thing, I don't think we are lacking faith to say, you know what, I'm going to protect this as best I can, trusting in the Lord. One of the things I really appreciate the founders is that the entire time they fought the American Revolution during a smallpox epidemic, by the way. Smallpox kills 30% of its victims in its mildest form. But anyways, when the founding fathers were fighting the revolution, they frequently, hourly, sometimes minute by minute, trusted the Lord, called on him, praised him, prayed to him, asked his help. Washington is on record over and over and over again attributing various events in the American Revolution to the direct intervention of divine providence. Many of the other leaders were too. So to say, here's God's inestimable gift to us, and on my hierarchy...
God's gift, pardon me. God's gift to us is freedom from sin.
Yes.
We need to be really, really super clear on that. And there is no other freedom. There's no other freedom that's needed.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. My personal hierarchy is salvation is his greatest gift to us. Under that, the next gift I would list, you could say health, family. My next
those
gift,
are privileges.
And those are gifts as well. I have a number of friends who are single. They will be the first to tell you, if the Lord has given you a family, you are very blessed.
It's a blessing. It's a blessing.
Blessing and a wonderful gift. But at any rate, the next under salvation for me is political liberty. The reason why is I don't think life is worth living if you are a slave to sin but under that, if you are enslaved politically. And
How do you think? How do you resolve that with Paul's writing?
as far as what?
Paul didn't feel that political freedom was necessary. And in fact, had it been necessary for him, he wouldn't have been able to fulfill God's mission for his life.
Well, Paul didn't think electricity was necessary either.
It's not.
No, it isn't. But then again, tornadoes touched down near here not too long ago, and we were without power for 5 hours. It's not something I'd want to live without. Could I live without electricity? Yeah, but life would not be as enjoyable.
Agree.
Convenient.
Agree. The maintenance of our culture and our civilization, I think, is a high priority for us as human beings, and as believers participating in our community. But I think we need to be cautious about noting that it's the freedom from sin. That's the gospel that we share, and that's what integrates us into our community. And then as integrated members of our community, we have the opportunity to reinforce our society through being diligent and productive and all of these other things that come out of our calling. And keeping there is only one priority, which is to place God above all else. And it's I don't think you're doing this, but I think a lot of people, especially libertarian Christians, begin to idolatrize freedom. Freedom can become physical freedom. Political freedom is an idol for many libertarians, and political freedom does not show up on Christ's radar. It isn't there.
No, it isn't. But at the same point, let's remember that he chose to come to earth under a very tyrannical government. He chose to come at a time when ideas on political liberty were unknown. He chose to come at a time when people assumed they would be ground into the dust and dirt. There are a number of verses in the Bible that extol the individual and extol the worth given to the individual and raise the individual above the mass. And God's love for us is individualized. Those are all ideas that come out of Christianity. And in fact, the whole idea of political liberty comes out of Christianity. There's that wonderful verse in the Gospels where Christ says to the disciples, look, the Gentiles boss each other around, but not you. That's not what I'm calling my church to be. I'm calling my church to serve one another and to love one another. Love is the very antithesis of totalitarianism and the compulsion that is organized and codified in the state. Okay, so Christ set up a kingdom for all of us that is the absolute opposite of the political kingdoms that rule this world. I just love that the passage in Luke that describes how Satan took Christ in the wilderness and took him up onto the mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the earth. That word in Greek refers specifically to the political aspects, okay? And said to him, hey, I will give you all these. Well, you can't give something you don't own. So since Christ didn't dispute the fact that Satan owned the political kingdoms, I think all of us need to be sworn enemies of political government. It is satanic. It is out to destroy the church. It's out to destroy Christianity. And after all, I know each of us nailed Christ to the cross with our sins. But what instrument actually put him there? Government. Never lose sight of that.
Agree with that. And it was through Christ's death that he fulfilled his purpose, which creates an interesting little thing to think about.
Yes.
And many of us will in fact fulfill our purpose through the way we die, whether it's of disease or who knows. There's a lot of us who we go through our whole lives and we wonder what's the purpose, what's the meaning, and it's at the very end we find out it's for the end. So
it certainly could be the way things are kind of looking, it certainly could be the way that Christ died too, or several of the apostles or the martyrs.
I agree entirely. I think the American church is heading into a full-blown age of persecution. And I think this is the beginning of the end of freedom in this country. I expect persecution to really come here. Persecution of the church and of Christians, whether nominal or devout, is a feature and hallmark of totalitarian governments worldwide. Since the 19th century, totalitarian governments have, without exception, preyed on Christians. As our government becomes more and more totalitarian, and quite frankly, all these executive orders keeping people prisoners in their own homes, that has never happened before in American history. And I'm tired of the websites that talk about the 1918 flu pandemic and how, people were sheltering in place. No, that is not comparable. That's not what's going on now. There are National Guard patrolling different places to make sure you don't leave your house. There are forcible quarantines. Canada is fining people $500,000 and $750,000 if they are under a quarantine and they leave their homes. Okay? And don't fool yourselves and think, well, that's Canada. No, Canada and Canadian American politicians talk back and forth all the time. And what one gets away with, then the other one will try. So look for that to come here. I just see full-blown persecution of the Christian church. And that's also a caution to everyone whose pastor capitulated to the state. Understand, you cannot depend on that wuss when persecution comes. When soldiers come to him and jam a gun in his face and say, who in your congregation has been a troublemaker? You can bet your sweet bippy he's going to betray you. Okay? When all governor had to do was suggest, close your church. Oh, yes, right away, sir. Okay? Don't think for a minute he won't turn over every single thing he can on you and squeal himself raw so that he and his family escape the wrath of the government.
Yeah, I think part of that is shown with, because you have governors that said you should think about doing this. And so on the one side, you could say, well, some churches decided to do that because they were worried about infecting members of the congregation. But then when you see congregations gathering together anyways, and then the state come in and say, oh, no, you don't understand. When we suggest things, that's the law. And forbidding them physically, or, you mentioned, Becky, people doing this drive-in church thing. Mm-hmm. They're even giving people tickets for that.
Yes.
So it's not, they do not want us to get together, period. And I think it has nothing to do with spreading the virus. To them, it's complete control. I mean, could you imagine being a politician and having Christians under your control? The ones that throughout history have been rebelling against, not necessarily, maybe that's the wrong word, but the first church wasn't supposed to get together, and they did. The Chinese church isn't supposed to get together, and they did. And here, the American church is not supposed to get together, and they're listening.
That's right.
They're obeying.
Absolutely. Amen. Yep. It is a blot on us, and we will carry that blot through eternity. How can a pastor who agreed to close his church get into heaven and look Richard Wurmbrand in the eyes? Okay? I don't want to be that person. I want to be able to go up to the early martyrs and talk with them and look them in the eyes and say, yeah, I did my best to live up to your example. I want to go up there, and when I meet Fox, I want to say, great book. I don't have to say, but you know what? They suggested we close, and so I did. Okay, I mean, this is insanity. And
you want to hear that? Well done, good and faithful servant.
I told my husband just the other day, I am so disgusted with the American church. If I were the Lord, I'd just wipe it off the earth. I really would. I'm just so disgusted with the cowardice, with the lack of any kind of spine, with the kowtowing and caving and capitulating to godless politicians, to bureaucrats. that, these quack doctors that can't find work in the private sector. So what do? They become public health bureaucrats, and we're listening to them? I mean, come on.
Where do you think?
Well, that partnership was made long ago. I mean, that was one of the things we talked about on Saturday, is like what's being revealed now is something that happened decades ago.
Yeah.
What do you think coming to the future, Becky? One of the things that is upsetting, worrisome, or whatever, one of the things that I think about is churches being so ready to obey and just shut down. So what are they going to do when we're seeing in China, they're not necessarily getting a vaccination yet. No one is. But what are they going to do when there's a vaccination and Bill Gates gets his way and it has a little tattoo in it that has a little marker? I mean, are we going to have the pastors? Are they going to be the ones standing at the church door, making sure we all have the marks before we're allowed into the congregation?
I wouldn't put it past them after their behavior over this last month. I mean, I just.
And how many Christians are going to go along with it? Because, well, our leaders have said this was okay. Now they're saying this is okay. We're putting our trust in the state. The state says the only way we can get back to normalcy. And Fauci's talking about it. Trump's talking about it. I haven't really heard him talk about the vaccination, the tattooed vaccination or whatever. But they are talking about having an ID card or a new passport or whatever. And, with the what was that? The 201 meeting or whatever they've talked, and Gates has talked about forever. We got to have a vaccination where we put this little dot in you or whatever, and we know that you're clear, you're free. What's wrong with that?
Yeah. I kind of lost all faith in people's willingness to defy the state. When I watched parents take their children, and I'm talking little kids, to airports and allow the TSA's thugs and perverts to grope them. And for a while, the TSA was outright raping little kids, digitally raping them. And parents just stood there filming and posting it to YouTube and saying, look what the TSA, how the TSA abused my child. And I want to say, what in the world made you take your child to an airport? And then when you knew going in that could happen. And a trip to Disney World was more important to you than protecting your child from sexual assault. Then once you saw it happening and knew for a fact your child was going to be savaged by pedophiles, you didn't step in, you let it go forward, and you filmed it, and you think that's how you defend your child? So these scenarios you pose, Joshua, I'm just like, I will believe anything. I watched the mother that will kill you for looking at her kid cross-eyed in the supermarket. I watched her stand there and film while the TSA savaged her child. So I have absolutely no faith that either my fellow Christians after this last month or just ordinary Americans will stand up for freedom and righteousness and truth. This nation is really sad, Mark. I try to picture George Washington at the airport with a goon approaching Martha. I'll tell you what, that goon wouldn't have gotten 50 feet of her. And I try to picture Patrick Henry going to church and finding it closed and saying, well, okay, good. I'll go home because after all, I don't want to get smallpox either. And I just don't see it.
No. And we've talked about that before with Patrick Henry. It's always been kind of taught that his liberty or death was all about this going to war with Britain. And he wrote that, or the speech came about from seeing a pastor in the locks because he didn't have permission to preach.
That's right.
So he was in the stocks in the middle of town, and he went through there. That's where it came from. Yes. It wasn't, let's go to war with Britain. It was, why are we imprisoning pastors?
Yes, it was a blow at a speech for religious freedom. And that is just a dearly bought freedom. all freedom is. I really don't, because of the dumbed down public schools. Most Americans go to public schools and they are indoctrinated with Marxism and other brainwashing nonsense. They come out of the public schools and they watch the media, which is more Marxism, more dumbing down. They don't have any sense of history, let alone of how rare liberty is in world history. They don't have any understanding of how fragile freedom is, and that it disappears when we're distracted by things like public health bureaucrats telling us we have to stay home and shelter in place. Okay, they just don't have any idea. Nobody seems to realize that when government steals freedom from you, it doesn't give it back. That you have to take it back at the point of a gun. Okay, government has gotten away with imprisoning all of us in our homes for a month now. And by the way, they're talking about extending this. Okay, I'm seeing estimates of a year and a half until a vaccine is out there. They expect us all to stay imprisoned in our homes and not worship and not see one another for a year and a half. Okay, if anyone out there thinks we're going to get our freedom back after that, I got a bridge I want to sell you.
Right. It's not going to, there's no return to normal, like Dave was saying.
No, especially with the very low level of pushback I've seen. Our paper here runs articles for the public health quacks, and it'll be all about the snitches that have called in to rat out a business that isn't enforcing social distancing. And the articles always end with an exhortation that if you see something, say something. And here's the number for the public health quack that you can call too and rat out your neighbors. And, with this kind of mentality, it will be no wonder to me when we make that final descent into utter totalitarianism.
We actually recommended that people call their local snitch lines. And the day after we did, our local snitches here in Fairbanks, they had to put out a statement asking people to quit calling because so many people were calling in.
Oh, that's excellent.
They said that people were calling that didn't necessarily understand that they were supposed to call about the coronavirus and people not social distancing, and ask that people actually understand what they're calling about before they call.
Yep. Very creative, guys. I commend you.
So many avenues of action right now.
Yeah. Good point, Dave. Yeah, Becky, can you give us some action? Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I just going to ask real quick, and this may have been covered a little bit before I joined a little late. Becky, do you see this as an opportunity to expose the wheat from the chaff in the church? The real Christians versus the posers. You were talking about, if you have a pastor who's just giving into this and closing down the church, they're the same ones who are going to rat you out. Yes. Is this an opportunity to find out who those traitors really are and avoid them?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me say that I choose my churches very carefully. Mm-hmm. I want a church that preaches the gospel without apology and without any dilution. I want a church that, and I'll go through their doctrinal statements. I want to make sure we're on the same page. The Bible is the inspired word of God. It is verbally inspired. We don't pick and choose the passages that are inspired. The entire thing is from the hand of the Lord. And Jesus Christ is the Son of God. His death is what made possible our freedom from sin. It is by faith alone, in Christ alone, to God's glory alone, by God's grace alone, through faith alone. Okay, I want the 5 solas in the doctrinal statement somewhere. So I am very, very picky. I don't want women leading the church. I just don't think the Bible endorses that. I've read compelling arguments that indicate some people differ with that. Okay, but I personally am not comfortable in such a church. I don't want sodomites in the congregation. Okay, it's one thing to come and repent. If you're attending week after week after week and you're not under conviction, I'm sorry, I'm not going to worship there because something's wrong with the preaching. So at any rate, that's all by way of saying, when I get in a church and it is a Bible believing, Bible preaching, Jesus Christ is the Son of God and our way to salvation, I would expect the preacher, the pastor, the deacons to be God-fearing men in sincerity and truth. And up until last month, I would have said that without any hesitation whatsoever of both the churches I attend. Now, is it separating the chaff from the wheat? Michael, I don't know. I am so disillusioned, so terribly disappointed. These were men I looked up to. I looked up to their wives, to their families. I thought these were people who loved the Lord, who would have laid down their life for the Lord if it had ever been necessary. I thought they genuinely loved each other. I thought that they revered the Bible, that they loved the Lord more than anything on the face of this earth. And the depth of my disillusionment, I can't even express. To call them goats, as I have publicly on Lou Rockwell, that's what I'm thinking of them now. These are the goats, and the sheep have been separated from them. But it doesn't give me any pleasure to say that, and I say it with all sadness and a very heavy heart, that men and women I had considered my brothers and sisters in the Lord, that I had looked up to and cherished, have utterly, utterly betrayed him.
Worth noting, I think, along those lines, remembering that we follow Jesus.
Yes,
not
the governor.
We
Yes.
follow not words. We don't worship words.
No.
We worship Christ. And so, and as a Christian, like libertarians who are prone to worshiping freedom, there are a lot of Christians who worship words and not the way of Christ.
Yes.
Christ had in his 12 closest followers the man who would ultimately betray him.
Yes.
And he always treated him with love and kindness.
Yep.
And he would have forgiven him, I'm sure, if Judas had not killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the way of Christ is a lot harder to follow than a list of rules. And Christ did some pretty extraordinary things. And we're going to have an opportunity to do some pretty extraordinary things as the simple way of living that comes with freedom erodes away.
Yeah. Yeah. We are, I think, Michael, going back to your question or observation, I think we are going to see a lot of that over the next years, unless the Lord comes. And
we'll take that.
I guess it's in times of darkness that God shines his light. So I guess we can be grateful for that.
We have a caller. We have a caller on. If you would like to field that.
Absolutely.
Very cool. All right, caller, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool. You are on with Becky Akers. Let me turn you up a little bit here. There you go.
Yes. Hey, thank you, Becky, for all the writing you do on Lou Rockwell.
Thank you.
I think you saw something that I sent out to the churches in Texas and commented on that, which was my open letter to the Texas churches. That's where I'm calling from. And I think there's a couple of problems here with the clergy, shall we say. One of them is, I think, and I haven't listened to the whole show. I've been out sort of violating curfews here.
Good for you.
Good.
Doing unnecessary things in the eyes of our overseers.
Good.
The big thing I see is a misunderstanding of Romans 13 on the part of the church, and it's been an ongoing problem for some time. And I didn't hear the earlier part of the broadcast here, so I don't know if I'm covering ground that you've already traveled over. But I think that's one of the major issues. It's simply a misunderstanding. I mean, it gets to the point where you've seen translations that say all government's from God, and anyone who resists government is resisting God. I mean, it's that level of insanity in understanding. And it's partly the translation that's the issue. That's probably mostly the translation, but also the context that modern Christians are reading Romans 13. So in the end, they really have been taught essentially to obey government unless it's some obvious evil directive like kill your children or kill your neighbor. Then they might resist, but otherwise they'll just go along until evil's completely overcome the situation. So I think if there's some way we could start a discussion within the church, an honest one, of what does Romans 13 really mean and what is our relationship to government. And if you look in Scripture, it's pretty obvious to see what government does to Christians in general and in history. So this whole idea of looking for photo ops with the governor or photo ops with the local politicians and being loved by the local leaders, a very governmental leader, is almost the opposite of where we should be. I mean, the government should really be coming to the 28,000 churches in Texas and say, hey, you know, what can we do to make you happy? But instead, it's the other way around. We're like dogs with their paws up, waiting for the crumbs to be thrown from the governor here. It's absolutely absurd. So I share your anger, Becky, with the church. They've absolutely been worthless in this situation. They're completely ignorant or fearful. I don't know. It's just maddening. So anyway, I got much more to say, but I'll just leave it at that.
I appreciate your comments. Yes, I think a lot of this, I wanted to tell you, I explained earlier, and maybe you didn't hear, I have two churches I attend. I've approached both pastors have preached on Romans 13 or otherwise referenced it in Sunday school or whatever. I've had discussions with both of them on Romans 13, and their reactions were identical. Well, I've never heard that. Well, that's not an orthodox interpretation. Well, no, you're wrong. And you know, again, completely unwilling to even entertain the idea that maybe, possibly, Romans 13 is not saying you better serve your government no matter what, and you better respect your government, obey your government no matter what. I mean, just totally unwilling to even entertain the idea. So I agree with you that one of the things desperately needed in the American church is a huge discussion on Romans 13, but that's not going to happen as long as pastors are gatekeepers and as long as they can stifle everybody with whom they disagree. And again, there aren't that many of us out there that understand what Romans 13 is really getting at, you know? And the other problem you have complicating this is that many people who do understand what Romans 13 is all about don't go to church. You know, they're like in their house. I've gotten letters from them and emails from them by the dozens, and they say, well, I can't find a church that I like. You know, they're all corrupt 501c3 churches, and I'm not going to go there. And it's like, you know, come on, guys, give me a break. I need backup here. I need other people coming in and saying, Romans 13 is not about kissing the governor's butt, okay? It just isn't.
Well, another thing that troubles me about this is the selfishness that's going on. Because at first when these things come out and say, oh, they're banning everybody. So what's churches? It's Resurrection Sunday coming up. What will we do? So they go back and somewhere along the line, the word gets back to the governor, says, well, you know, we'll make you an essential service. Okay, fine. But the local potentates decide, well, you can't have more than 10 people.
Yes.
So then they say, well, maybe we'll do drive-in churches. So, okay, we're happy now. The governor's kind of made us happy. We can still have church. We'll pretend we're having church. Well, what about the people in their congregations that have lost jobs? What about the people there who are suffering because not a peep about them? It's all just about how our churches were offended by having to cut back on their services. And mind you, there's no complaints. There's just grumbling within the church, but no actual complaints that I'm aware of back to government. And so as soon as they got the crumbs from the governor, everything went, we did proceeded as normal, and I couldn't get anybody interested in complaining to the local government, essentially. It's just maddening. I mean, they don't care about their congregation. Well, they'll care when the money stops flowing in. Then they'll care. But I don't know if that'll be what point that'll be, whether it's too late. And I think a bunch of churches are going to shut down, and I hate to say it because they do a lot of good work, but they deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. They, I heard from one pastor whose congregation is very elderly, and it's a tiny congregation, but he told me, we can't live stream. Nobody in my parish, my 12 or 15 folks that turn out, none of them are computer literate. They wouldn't have any idea how to access a live stream. He said, so we have to meet, and he's getting flack from it about meeting from the local cops, and the cops are trying to intimidate him, and they're showing up and busting up his services. Now, this is right from the pit of hell, and every pastor in the country ought to be ashamed for not standing with this courageous man.
I agree.
Well, this takes away with people having lost their jobs. I mean, one of the commandments that we're given throughout the whole Bible is to take care of the poor, the elderly, the widows, the fatherless. And one of the things that this does when we're closing down churches is we're also taking away that commandment, the ability to fulfill that command. Because I know that there are churches that give food to people that come there that need it. I know there's people that go and visit people in prisons that are part of different churches, and all those things are uprooted. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to follow the commandments in scriptures.
And look at that, Joshua. The public schools are all concerned that kids are going to miss their free lunches and free breakfasts. And they go out, and I've actually seen where some public school districts are sending caseworkers around to individual homes to make sure the kids get fed. And yet churches were non-essential. By the way, doesn't everybody just love that? The most non-essential leeches in society, politicians and bureaucrats deciding which essential businesses are essential. I just think that is just the height of irony.
There's I think our caller has one more point. There's one point that I want to throw out, see where it goes. Caller, sorry about that. You got disconnected there. You got one more point here?
Yes, I did. I just had to make the final point that virtually all pastors and virtually everybody in America has been forced through government schooling. And government schooling basically teaches you to, obey the authorities. And so, of course, they don't teach anything about the Constitution. If they do, it's untrue. So this is the end result of it, I think, is that a population and a clergy that is essentially made in the mold that the government wants. And so I think that's another aspect to this whole issue. They're not only fearful but they're also been brainwashed, frankly. And mind laundry, as Will Grigg used to call it. Oh, that's my point.
Cool.
The great
Thank
Will
you for
Grigg.
the call.
I miss him. Okay, well, thank you.
Yeah, Will Grigg was a hero to all of us for sure.
Yeah.
On the essential services, I think that's a very interesting point. Josh brings up. I would, the way that I understand Christ and Paul's teaching was to be inward looking first. If you're looking to the state for righteousness, you're never going to find it, as Becky's pointed out, and as Robert Wenzel pointed out. And so being surprised that the state isn't doing the right thing is, I think, maybe reflects on a certain degree of naivete. So rather than talking about that, I think an interesting conversation is when an issue like this comes about, when there's a disease outbreak or something like that, why isn't the church already the most essential service in the community? Why isn't the church already the most essential service in the community? Because it's not. Like, if we're honest about it, it isn't. It doesn't feed the hungry. It doesn't clothe the people who can't clothe themselves. It doesn't meet the needs of the poor. And so it can just be brushed aside. And who misses it? And so I think, like the sudden loss of freedom, which is actually probably 50 years or 100 years in the making, it could be that the church's irrelevance in the United States has been 20 or 30 years in the making, as the church handed off all of its responsibilities to the state.
Yes, I agree with you entirely. Although let's remember, the state is its own religion, and it has a religion, Marxism. Marxism is very much, in fact, Karl Marx set it up specifically to be a counterpart to Christianity and a mockery of Christianity. Richard Wurmbrand has a marvelous book on this called Satan and Marx, and he goes through and documents how Karl Marx set up his philosophy to mimic and mirror Christianity. At any rate, my point simply is that United States governments at all levels, local, state, national, have very much adopted Marxism. They are practicing Marxism. This is a false religion. Progressives have absolute religious faith in the state. They ascribe to Marxism. So when Marxism takes over things like feeding the hungry, we should recognize, and I agree with you entirely, David, the church should not have relinquished that. Our ancestors should have stood firm on that. That's one reason why we need to stand firm now. We can't let the state shut down our churches, because our grandkids are going to be sitting in judgment on us and saying, you know what, you had a chance, you blew it, now look at us. But at any rate, you're right. Our ancestors should never have agreed, our grandparents should never have agreed that the state gets to go out and feed the hungry. That's the church's responsibility and the church's calling. And because they welched on it, we're now facing the biggest threat to freedom our country's ever known.
I wonder, I agree with that sentiment. I wonder if the path, the path of Christ in particular, and of God through history. I mean, this is one of the interesting parts about the Old Testament story, is always this really bizarre, non-direct thing. Like you take the story of Joseph, right?
Right.
Being sold into slavery so that he can make these grain stores to save Egypt and then be reunited with. It's like this Byzantine thing. It makes no sense.
Right.
And I wonder if the path back towards freedom, in particular for the church, doesn't start with getting back on our proverbial hands and knees and doing some service in our communities.
It could. I see a lot of, what's happening right now, the lockdowns and all of this, as we mentioned before, it's totally unprecedented. It's eerie because it's so very different from the way government usually acts. As far as the taxation, the IRS postponing the filing date and elections being postponed. Okay, we've gone over all that. We are at a pivotal moment in American history. I think it is as pivotal as the month of June, 1775. Okay? Things could go either way. Government may continue clamping down. Government may find no resistance. Government will continue stealing our freedom until basically we are inmates in concentration camps, starving to death and being tortured to death if we protest our starvation. Okay? Could go the other way. It could be that more and more people say, wait a minute, what do you mean I can't go out and work? What do you mean I'm not allowed to leave my home? I mean, the TSA is a marvelous recruiter for freedom. Okay, people who go through the TSA and routinely deal with it, they hate it. They're starting to wise up and realize government is not my friend. Government wants to sexually assault me and search my pockets and then hold me because they found a joint in my pocket. Okay, this is not a good thing to be doing. All right, this may function the same way. This may make a lot of recruits to anarchy, to freedom. There may be a time, and it may come within the next few weeks or months, where shots are exchanged. And it'll be Bunker Hill all over again, or the Boston Massacre. So a lot of things could happen. A lot of good come out of this. I've been wondering lately, is this God's judgment on godless America? Has the Lord finally had it with the promotion of sodomy and the outright murder of the unborn, and people laughing at him, and people just sticking it right in his face, and the transgender nonsense, and the utter absolute filth from Hollywood, a filth that we export all over the world? And I'm wondering, with the wars and the chaos that the deep state sows all over the world, has the Lord just finally said, you know what? Just as I called judgment on Jerusalem and Judah and Israel, I'm calling it on you now. And this is what you're going to deal with. You are going to sink beneath the waves of totalitarianism. And this is my judgment on America. I don't know. Is it instead his way of getting rid of the deep state, getting rid of Hollywood? Are we going to have another American Revolution where a small band of devoted patriots steps forth and says, you have destroyed liberty for the last time. We're taking this country back? Is the Lord going to work that way? I don't know. I pray every day he will send us a revival straight from his throne, that this country will turn back to him and acknowledge him and repent.
Change your mind.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
Yep.
Yep.
Yes. Well, we will certainly see as it unfolds.
Yeah, a lot of good could come out of it. I keep seeing these optimistic articles, different places. Well, families are spending lots of time together now, and maybe they never will go back to playing video games. They'll just spend time together. I have that same hope politically.
Homeschooling, hopefully.
Wake up to realize politicians and bureaucrats are our enemies. They are out to enrich themselves. They're out to gain power over us. They are not our friends. They are out to destroy our country if they possibly can, and destroy each of us individually. It's time to stand up against these people. Maybe that's the way people will start looking at it. A lot of good could come out of this. But on the other hand, if a resistance doesn't rise soon, and I mean a sizable resistance, not 10 or 15%, but a sizable resistance against all this, I think we're going to sink and go the way of into totalitarianism, just the way Soviet Russia did.
On the knife edge.
Yeah.
On the knife edge. We have one more caller. If you would be so kind as to take them, then I think we're wrapping up here after that.
Absolutely.
Cool. Caller, you are on Patriots Lament. Becky Akers.
Thank you very much, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And Becky, you and I have communicated through email several times from your articles on Lou Rockwell.
Great.
I'd share. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, you and I have communicated a few times on emails through Lou Rockwell. I'm just telling you more in hearing you talk today. But I thought I'd share Psalm 118, verses 8 and 9. It's right in the center of the Bible.
Right.
All right, here we go. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes.
Yes.
And, we can't trust the numbers that the government's given us. And a lot of what they're been telling us, can't trust. But I've also got some notes in the Bible in the book of Habakkuk. And the question I've written in there is, Washington going to punish Christians? Now, this note's been in there for about 10 years. And if you read the book of Habakkuk, I can see where the Chaldeans are the American government. And the people worship the net. The Chaldeans worship the net that brought them all that wealth. Americans worship the military, which brings them all this wealth.
Yep.
And I do think that, we're moving under judgment for all the reasons you said a few minutes ago. And then if you read Revelation, I'll point people there when they start worrying about things. How would you bring about the plagues and all the things and judgments in Revelation? Think about the last 20 years, how things develop. Seems like it's working according to the Lord's providence and plan.
Yes.
Might be
And
wrong there.
I think we need to keep that in mind too. God was not taken by surprise by any of this. He is still sovereign. What he will be accomplished. And he will set the agenda. Man may think he's controlling events. No, the Lord has all of this firmly under control. And so from that aspect, I don't worry about it. I just say, Lord, use me however you want to, however you can. I am your handmaid. Send me out there. Tell me what to do. And all of us are in his keeping. No matter how bad things get, we need to remember that. We need to have faith that he knows best, that he will send us what is best for us individually and as a country. And if he has decided to call judgment on this country, I mean, who among us can say, Lord, you're not fair. Lord, you didn't have enough patience. Lord, how can you do this to us? I mean, any of us, the more we love him, the more we can say this country so richly deserves judgment.
Yes, and a lot of people will tell me, see, I shouldn't be worried. Well, I'm not worried. I'm aware.
Yes.
The Bible says to be gentle as a lamb, but wise as a serpent.
Yes.
You'd be surprised if you're hauled off to those camps. And if your trust is in the Lord and you know where your salvation is, that you're saved and you'll be in heaven, well, if he wants to take me in the next 2 seconds, he can take me. And I tell people, my only worry is that, make sure my family is, saved and taken care of.
Yep.
But, I'm worried that the government's going to use any kind of shots exchange as a chance to go out in mass. But
absolutely.
wait and see.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We're going to rise up all at once and not wait for them to come down your street.
Yeah, we should be aware of that. If shots are fired, government will react with every ounce of strength against the rebels, and the rest of us should be ready to stand with those folks.
And there's not that many of them compared to those of us.
That's right. That's right. And if the founding fathers could stand up against the most powerful empire of the day, we can certainly stand up against this empire.
And if you look at what Gandhi did in India, he walked around the country and told the two groups that the British had separated. I don't know what those two groups are, but he had two groups at each other's throats. He reconciled their differences until they realized, hey, it's not me against you, it's us against the British. And their mass civil disobedience brought the British Empire to their knees in India, and they had to leave.
Yes. And that's something I'm always amazed Americans don't seem to quite comprehend, is it is us against the politicians and bureaucrats. Now, the politicians and bureaucrats get it. They know that it's them against us. But the average taxpayer and the average sheeple out there, they don't have any clue to it. So that is something we should definitely all keep in mind.
It's going to take some mass civil disobedience and people willing to get arrested, refuse to pay the fine.
Yes.
And I've read a lot of stories where people have gotten arrested and they say, I'll take 30 days in jail. I'm not going to give you the money. And they realize it's going to cost us way more to house and feed this joker than we'll get in a fine. So, we're just going to let you go.
Good.
In every case. But you can see through that. Just don't be intimidated. And we'll all have to sacrifice here or there. We'll just have to take it as it comes to each individual.
And it may be that when you're in jail, the Lord has a lot of inmates for you to be witnessing to. So
yeah, just like Paul, because he won over people right and left when he was in jail.
That's right. That's right.
All right, I'm going to let y'all get back to the show. I appreciate the opportunity to call in, and I'll be visiting y'all again in the future.
Very cool. Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
I wanted to say something real quick that on our YouTube channel, we did have Professor Gerard Casey join us, and we did a little, I don't remember how long it was, but we went through Romans 13, and he was fantastic. And you can actually go in a little bit further back, and Becky's been on with us before, and we went through Romans 13 pretty extensively.
Yeah.
It is important.
Yeah, and it's so mistranslated and so misunderstood. Essentially, in the first part of Romans 13, the Greek word for government that I mentioned before from Luke 4, where it pertains to the political government, that word is entirely missing. Okay, so the authorities that are being spoken of are private authorities, such as a father exercises in his home, or a tutor would exercise over a student, or something like that. It's just astounding how much mistranslation and misunderstanding of that passage is out there, and it just permeates the church. And as I mentioned before, you cannot get pastors to listen to anything different.
Yeah. You know, I think as we're closing up here, what we've all been talking about, and a difficulty is to just get people to understand they just need to remove their consent. I mean,
Yes.
there's so much of what should we do? What should we do? What should we do? Start with your brain and remove the consent, that little thing that's in your brain telling you, well, it is the government. You got to obey them. Remove that from your mind. Cut
Yes.
it out of there.
And
And-
laugh at them. Laugh at them.
Right.
And when
Yes,
you're with your
politics.
family and friends and they're, so rattled about God, tell them, come on. I mean, just make a joke about them and laugh at them. And it's just exactly what you say, Joshua. Withdraw your consent and convince the people around you to withdraw their consent too. And I think you'll be amazed the more you talk to people and the more you tell them how, politicians and bureaucrats are your worst enemies. You're going to be amazed how many people agree with you. And others who have never thought about it, you're going to plant seeds and they'll be thinking about it. And, as I said, the TSA is a great recruiter for liberty. This whole episode may as well. I think as the bills start coming due and as more and more people face homelessness and bankruptcy, let's be sure that we are putting the blame where it belongs. It was not coronavirus that did this. It was politicians and bureaucrats that did this. And let's be sure we point that out.
And be ready to help those folks as they start to fall off the map. I
Yes.
mean, that's the thing, is that the opportunity for community building is unprecedented here. And it's that can be really convincing to people when they're like, hey, how come you're not afraid of helping me, of being within 6 feet of me right now? How come you're helping? How come you're, letting me stay in your house? How come you're feeding me? All of those things. Those questions get really deep into people's minds and encourage them to ask the questions that lead to a new society.
Yes, absolutely. There is unprecedented opportunity here, just as there is unprecedented danger.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure and privilege.
Yes, Becky, it's been way too long. And if we don't, we kind of hope our channel gets shut down because that'd be kind of cool. But at the same time, if it doesn't, we'll have to have you back, especially as things keep progressing here. Because, we believe that our faith in Christ is the most important thing, and sharing that with the world is the most important thing. And that's why we love having you on, because you're a rattlesnake for it, for sure.
And here it's supposed to be harmless as a serpent and or harmless as a dove and wise as a serpent, but now we got rattlesnakes in there too, huh? Well, thank
we
you
love
all
you.
very
That's
much.
great.
Yep. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Becky.
And we
All right.
will be back on Wednesday at 4:30 Eastern, 12:30 Alaska time, market close, for our Wednesday show. Thanks to everybody for tuning in for this special guest episode. Check out the YouTube channel. Go over to our channel. You can see our other interviews. We just talked to Robert Wenzel a couple weeks ago. If you like the show, give us a like, subscribe, share with your friends, and we'll catch you guys on Wednesday.
Yep. Thanks, guys. Thanks to
Yep.
everyone watching.
Thanks.
See you guys.